Welcome to History Recapped. Today we dive into one of the most devastating economic events in modern history, the Great Depression. The Great Depression was not just a financial crisis, it was a global catastrophe that lasted from 1929 to the late 1930s. It brought massive unemployment, poverty, and social unrest across the world. But how did it happen? Why did it last so long, and what lessons can we learn from it today? In this comprehensive episode, we'll take you through the causes, consequences, and legacy of the Great Depression. Part 1. The Roaring Twenties. To understand the Great Depression, we need to begin with the 1920s, a decade often called the Roaring Twenties. After World War I, the United States emerged as the world's leading economic power. There was a surge in consumer goods production, new technologies like the automobile and the radio, and a booming stock market. Mass production techniques pioneered by companies like Ford Motor Company revolutionized manufacturing, making goods cheaper and more accessible. Americans embraced consumerism, buying refrigerators, washing machines, and cars on installment plans, essentially an early form of consumer credit. The stock market also became a popular avenue for investment. Middle-class families and first-time investors poured their savings into stocks, often buying on margin, meaning they borrowed money to purchase shares. The prosperity, however, was not as stable as it seemed. Income inequality widened, with much of the wealth concentrated in the hands of a small elite. Farmers who had expanded production during World War I to feed Europe were now struggling due to overproduction and falling prices. The U.S. economy became heavily reliant on consumer spending and stock market speculation. Speculation ran rampant on Wall Street. Stock prices rose far beyond the actual value of the companies they represented. People believed stock prices would rise forever. This false sense of security set the stage for disaster. Part 2. The stock market crash of 1929. The collapse began on October 24, 1929, known as Black Thursday. Panic selling caused stock prices to plummet. Brokers attempted to stabilize the market by pooling resources to buy large blocks of stocks, temporarily halting the decline. However, the panic resumed the following week. On October 29, 1929, Black Tuesday, the stock market crashed completely. Over 16 million shares were traded in one day, and the market lost nearly $30 billion in value, a figure equivalent to hundreds of billions today. Entire fortunes evaporated overnight. Small investors were ruined, and even wealthy magnates suffered devastating losses. Billions of dollars were wiped out in hours. Banks, businesses, and investors lost everything. Stockbrokers called in margin loans, forcing more people to sell their shares at a loss, driving prices even lower. The crash shattered public confidence in the economy and set off a chain reaction that reverberated across the globe. While the crash did not directly cause the Great Depression, it was the spark that ignited a much larger crisis. It exposed the weaknesses of an unstable economy built on speculation, debt, and inequality. Part 3. Bank failures and the collapse of credit. Following the crash, thousands of banks failed. People rushed to withdraw their savings, causing bank runs. In an era before deposit insurance, when banks failed, depositors lost their life savings. By 1933, more than 9,000 banks had failed in the United States alone. These failures led to the collapse of the credit system. Businesses could no longer secure loans to operate or expand. Without access to credit, companies were forced to lay off workers and shut down factories. The collapse of credit created a vicious cycle. As more people lost their jobs, consumer spending decreased further. This led to even more business failures, reinforcing the downward spiral. Small towns, especially those dependent on a single industry, were decimated. Farmers lost their farms to foreclosure, and families were forced to leave their homes. Part 4. Unemployment and poverty. Unemployment soared. By 1933, nearly 25% of the U.S. workforce was unemployed. In some countries, like Germany, the unemployment rate reached nearly 30%. In industrial cities, entire neighborhoods were left without work. People lost their homes and farms. Shanty towns called Hoovervilles sprang up in parks, under bridges, and on the outskirts of cities. These makeshift shelters were named sarcastically after President Herbert Hoover, whom many blamed for the crisis. Breadlines and soup kitchens became a daily reality for millions. Charities and churches attempted to provide relief, but the sheer scale of the suffering overwhelmed private efforts. Farmers faced additional challenges during the Dust Bowl, which began in the early 1930s. A combination of severe drought, overfarming, and poor soil conservation techniques led to massive dust storms that swept across the Great Plains. Fields turned to dust, and thousands of families from Oklahoma, Texas, and Kansas migrated west in search of work, their stories famously captured in John Steinbeck's novel The Grapes of Wrath. Children dropped out of school to help support their families. Families moved in together to save on costs, and malnutrition became widespread. In cities, men stood on street corners selling apples for 5 cents just to survive. Part 5. Global Impact. The Great Depression was not just an American problem, it became a global crisis. The interconnectedness of the global economy meant that the US collapse triggered failures around the world. Countries that depended on US loans and trade collapsed. Germany and Austria experienced massive banking crises. In Europe, reparations from World War I tied to the US banking system could no longer be paid. Britain, France, and other nations saw industrial production plummet. International trade declined by over 50% as nations imposed tariffs to protect their economies, leading to a trade war. The Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act, passed in the United States in 1930, raised tariffs on thousands of imported goods. Other countries retaliated with tariffs of their own, crippling global commerce. Colonial economies in Asia, Africa, and Latin America also suffered. Export-dependent nations saw commodity prices collapse. In China, India, and other colonies, the economic downturn fueled anti-colonial movements as people blamed imperial powers for their suffering. In Germany, the Depression paved the way for political extremism. The Weimar Republic, already unstable, collapsed, creating fertile ground for the rise of Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party. In Japan, the economic crisis contributed to the rise of militarism and expansionist policies that would lead to World War II. Part 6. Government Responses. Initially, governments responded with policies that made the crisis worse. In the United States, President Herbert Hoover resisted direct government intervention. He believed in rugged individualism, expecting businesses and charities to help the poor. The Federal Reserve, the central bank of the United States, made critical mistakes by tightening the money supply when it should have expanded it. This deflationary policy worsened the collapse. The Reconstruction Finance Corporation was created in 1932 to provide emergency loans to banks, railroads, and other large businesses. However, the public saw this as favoritism toward corporations while ordinary people continued to suffer. Hoover also signed the Smoot-Hawley Tariff, worsening the global trade collapse. As unemployment rose and hunger spread, Hoover's popularity plummeted. Part 7. The New Deal. In 1933, Franklin D. Roosevelt became President of the United States. His administration introduced the New Deal, a series of programs designed to stimulate the economy and provide relief to suffering Americans. Key New Deal programs included the Civilian Conservation Corps, CCC, which provided jobs for young men in public works projects such as building parks, planting trees, and improving infrastructure. The Works Progress Administration, WPA, which employed millions in construction, arts, and literacy programs. Social Security, providing financial support for the elderly, the unemployed, and disabled citizens. Banking reforms, including the creation of the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, FDIC, to protect bank deposits and restore trust in the financial system. The Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, established to regulate the stock market and prevent fraud. Roosevelt also used fireside chats, radio broadcasts, where he spoke directly to the public to restore confidence in the government and the economy. The New Deal provided immediate relief and reformed key sectors of the economy, though the Depression continued through much of the 1930s. Critics argued about government overreach, but supporters credited the New Deal with saving American capitalism. Part 8. The role of World War II in ending the Depression. The Great Depression did not fully end until World War II. As nations mobilized for war, factories reopened to produce military goods. Millions of men and women were employed in war industries, building tanks, aeroplanes, ships, and weapons. Government spending on an unprecedented scale pulled economies out of depression. War bonds, rationing, and military drafts transformed societies. By the early 1940s, the United States reached full employment and the economy boomed. Women entered the workforce in large numbers, symbolized by Rosie the Riveter, changing gender roles for generations to come. Part 9. Legacy and Lessons Learned. The Great Depression changed the way governments manage economies. It led to the rise of Keynesian economics, named after British economist John Maynard Keynes, who argued for increased government spending during economic downturns to stimulate growth. The crisis resulted in major reforms in banking, labor rights, and social welfare. Institutions like the FDIC, Social Security, and unemployment insurance are direct legacies of the era. It also led to the creation of regulatory bodies to oversee financial markets, preventing the kind of reckless speculation that led to the crash. Globally, the Depression taught the world about the dangers of economic nationalism and protectionism. It showed how fragile economies can be without safeguards and coordination between nations. The memory of the Great Depression influenced policies during future crises, including the 2008 global financial meltdown, where governments intervened quickly to prevent a similar collapse. Conclusion. The Great Depression was one of the most defining events of the 20th century. It reshaped economies, politics, and societies around the world. It left scars that are still studied and debated today. It is a stark reminder of the dangers of unregulated markets, the importance of financial oversight, and the human cost of economic collapse. Thank you for watching History Recapped. If you found this video insightful, please like, subscribe, and share it with others. Let us know in the comments what historical event you'd like us to cover next. Until next time, keep learning and keep history alive.